Hello everyone, my name is Phawx. In this video I'm going to be reviewing GPD's latest GPD Win Max 2. This is using AMD's latest 8840U. And I suspect that a lot of you are very curious on how much better AMD's 8840U is over the 7840U. There's actually a ton of nuance and we have to go over it. So buckle up. There's a lot to explore here and a lot of it might bake your noodle because we're going to be going in depth and kind of retreading old ground that I've already talked about on this channel previously, and that has to do with essentially the older video that I had made where I said the Steam Deck TDP is wrong. Largely, we're getting back into that same avenue here because AMD is playing fast and loose with how TDP is actually calculated and what that actually means. And putting 10-watt TDP on one machine and putting 10-watt TDP in the other machine, they both use different amount of total system power, despite the fact, because I have two GPD Win Max 2 machines, I can turn off the backlight on both of the LCDs, I can set the brightness to both 50%, I can tune the system exactly the same using different chips, and yet both of them set to 10 watt, and I'm using slightly more power on the 8840U. The bottom line here is that we need to escape from benchmarking handhelds against TDP alone. TDP is very important. We should still have these slices that are in there because they are necessary as a part of an equation to get a holistic view of how total system power favors into performance. It's actually necessary. You can't just do one and expect it to be the same everywhere. You actually have to do it all over the place. I am working on methods of my own to properly test this against total system power, and I'm going to start giving you a lens into what that looks like. Now, there are some things here that are going to be eye-opening for you. So we'll get into that in just a moment. This video will be broken down in a bunch of different parts, so take a look at the chapter links below to be able to navigate this video a little bit better. Briefly, to give you guys an idea of the type of methodology I use when doing the testing between the 8840U and the 7840U, both of these are set to the exact same. Now, while I do have some tests that I do run the RAM at 6400 MT, for all tests between the 8840U and the 7840U, I'm running at 7500 MT. My settings that I use, the power settings that I use, and this is what's going to give us those better power profiles. Like when we run indie games, it'll automatically clock down. So you see that I can use like 4.5 watts or 4 watts to run an indie game, an indie 2D game. That'll give us around 7 hours of battery life, which is really like the top end of type of battery life you're going to expect when playing some games. Very briefly, you can see my turbo boost is set to efficient aggressive. TDP is going to change, and I'm going to let you know whatever TDP I'm running anything at. My power profile is set to power saver. Likewise, the EPP mode for that is set to 100. This is going to dictate the type of power that we're going to the CPU. At EPP 100, we're saying don't push too much power to the CPU, which gives us more power to go to the GPU more often. The other part of this that I'm running is 24.2.1 driver set, so the very latest drivers. That's on both the 8840U and the 7840U. Likewise for Windows 11, 22H2, it's the latest version of that. And that is the comparison between the 7840U and 8840U. That's the type of configuration that I have set, so you can get an idea of the methodology that I'm using. Now that you have a better understanding of my methodology, let's jump into a synthetic gaming benchmark. The tool that I'm using is called Heaven. All of my tests are run at 720p. There are two different scenarios. I have a CPU bound and a GPU bound. CPU bound is basically all low settings. This is going to be challenging the CPU a lot more, so we'll be able to achieve a higher frame rate. The higher frame rate is going to be demanded by the CPU largely being able to handle those draw calls and be able to get a higher frame rate. Whereas a GPU bound test is going to be challenging the GPU side of the package because CPU and the integrated GPU. So we're going to be taking a look at how far we can push the GPU side with ultra settings, extreme tessellation, and 8 times anti-aliasing. So we're going to be able to get a better idea there. So if we jump into this graph, I'm comparing the 7840U versus the 8840U, and I'm doing it against both types of RAM settings. So one of them is running at 6400 MT and one of them is running at 7500 MT. And I did this for both. And this is a benchmark at every watt in this synthetic benchmark. Up first, let's take a look at the 7840U. The yellow and green lines. This is pretty interesting because it's super sloppy. It is how we think it should work. If we take a look at 6400 MT, the yellow line for 7840U, that should be running faster. This makes sense. Why it makes sense is because the memory that is running on the device shares a clock domain with the memory controller that is the uncore part of the package. So that is CPU, GPU, and uncore. If we're pushing this frequency on the memory controller higher, it's using more power, thus starving power from the CPU and GPU. So at lower TDPs, when we're running at a lower clock, obviously we're going to get better performance because the memory controller is running at a lower clock, using less power, more power to CPU, GPU. This makes sense. This is what we want to see. However, it's really sloppy all over. 7500 MT is kind of crazy. And even when we push more wattage into it, when 7500 MT starts to pick up, we're seeing it not be even. However, if we take a look at the 8840U, the type of performance that we're getting is far tighter. We are still better at the lower end for 6400 MT on the CPU side. However, we break away at around 12 or 13 watt on 7500 MT RAM setting on the 8840U. And more importantly, as we're going up, it's a very clean line showing you basically that percentage difference between the memory increase going from 800 megahertz to 937 megahertz. So from the way I look at this, there's a few things that we have to unpack here. And as we go through this video a little bit more, you're going to have a better understanding of where I'm coming from here, is that the 8840U, whatever AMD is doing, is handling this RAM a lot better than 7840U has. So when we take a look at this in a CPU-bound part of it, higher TDP, it's better to go to 7500 MT. Lower TDP, it's better to go to 6400 MT RAM. So that gives you a better understanding. So whatever way you plan on running the system, this is going to give you a better understanding of which direction you should go in. Switching over to the GPU-bound side, we're going to take a look at how this graphs along at every watt. Now, this is interesting once again. If we take a look at the 7840U, the yellow and green lines, what's interesting is 6400 MT is acting worse pretty much the entire way through, something that we really shouldn't be seeing. And 7500 MT is slightly better all the way. So at a GPU-bound side, where we're going to be stressed for performance, we're going to be stressed for bandwidth on the GPU side, we're not really seeing a large disparity here. So this doesn't make a bunch of sense with the type of results that we're getting. However, when we take a look at 6400 MT and 7500 MT on the 8840U, we see a line that corresponds to what we should anticipate. 6400 MT is winning at lower TDPs on the 8840U and switches over again around 13 watt. This makes sense. So again, this is where I'm coming from, where 8840U seems to be handling memory a lot better than the 7840U has. Once we go past 15 watt, you can see that nice, clean, even disparity between the performance difference, especially because we're so GPU bound here. Feeding that GPU is necessary. We have a very clean difference in the performance difference between those two memory settings. So from the way I'm looking at this, the 8840U is handling RAM a lot better than 7840U. This might be that there could be some GISA updates coming for the 7840U where we can update our BIOS to potentially handle memory stuff better. That is to be determined. But right now, 8840U is handling this RAM a lot better and more in line with what we should anticipate. We're obviously going to be getting into more benchmarks here. Again, you can take a look in the chapter links below if you're interested. But we're going to be talking about a lot of the things that the GPD Win Max 2 can do outside of just benchmarking and stuff. We're going to be taking a look at GPD G1 and how that runs on Oculink. There is something to be noted with Oculink, and I'll talk about that more in a second when we get into that particular section. But we're going to be taking a look at, the controls and everything else that makes the GPD Win Max 2 so special. So that part is still coming up. Before we touch base on the benchmarks, there's this important part of the video, and it's a bit of a smoking gun that we have to take a look at. I'm going to show you the 7840U and the 8840U running a 10-watt test. Now, this 10-watt test that I'm running, what you're going to be looking at is the battery lifetime that we're getting out of running a 10-watt test. This is Batman Arkham Knight that I'm running. And when we run this, you can see that even though we know, especially with the benchmarks coming up, that the 8840U is performing better than the 7840U, the reality is that the 7840U is using less power. It comes down to it's using around 7% less total system power than the 8840U. And these are using the exact identical same settings. So with my methodology that I already listed earlier on in this video, I set brightness to 50%. I turned off the keyboard backlight. Everything is exactly the same. Same Windows version, same settings. Everything is completely the same because they're both GPD Win Max 2s. So it makes it easier to test and have them both at the same exact settings. And with that, we find that we have a 7% power difference, total system power difference between these two platforms, meaning that even though I'm getting 10% better performance, I'm using 7% less power on the 7840U. So the actual difference in performance is very, very marginal. I'm going to go into a weird juxtaposition right here, so please bear with me and follow along. I'm going to be going into a battery life understanding of what you can get out of the GPD Win Max 2. But the part that I want to talk to you about is that I showed you that 10-watt test, so we got around 3.5 hours of battery life on the 8840U. Get around 3 hours and 45 minutes on the 7840U at 10 watt. So there's a 15-minute difference in there despite the fact that the 8840U is getting better performance, it's getting better performance because it's using more power. This is kind of understood and not something that's very special from 8840U. Things are going to change when we take a look at a 25-watt test, which I'm going to show you just in a moment, but I wanted to mention here, since we're kind of looking at this from a battery life perspective as well, because I've been doing these tests, you can also see that if we run an indie game, it's going to take somewhere around 4 watts of TDP. With medium brightness and with the keyboard backlight on, this would give us basically 7 hours of gameplay. However, if we were to turn off the keyboard backlight and lower the backlight of the screen a little bit more, we're going to get closer to around 8 hours of battery life. So I just wanted to kind of put this part in here just to give you a general understanding, because I'm going to be saying 1.5 hours battery life and 3.5 hours battery life, and that's like, well, that's not very great battery life, but you can get 7 and 8 hours of battery life, especially if a game doesn't demand it. When you are pushing that load and demanding it, obviously you're going to be getting different types of battery life. So it's all just a balancing act of whatever you're going to be pushing. Having said that, let's get into the next part of this, where we take a look at a 25-watt test and see how that differs at a total system power difference. And what we're looking at here is the difference between 7840U and 8840U running at 25 watt shows that what's actually happening is we're only looking at a minute difference between the two. Yes, we are using around 1.5 watts more total system power, but the reality is that we're not really using all that much difference in terms of total system power. And that 1.5 watts difference isn't going to show us that difference that we're gaining out of the 8840U. And largely, again, if we go back to my synthetic benchmarks, that the 8840U being able to use 7500 MT RAM more effectively is what I believe is what's giving us these gains at higher TDPs on the GPU side. So that is what we're looking at from the higher TDP point, being able to actually extract better performance when we compare these two platforms. So when we take a look at 10 watt, it's very clear that we're getting better performance on the 8840U because we are putting more power into the system. We are spending more power and getting more performance. Effectively, 7% better battery life on the 7840U means that this is marginal difference. However, at 25 watt, we are seeing some tangible differences. Now that I got that part of the way, let's jump into game benchmarks so you have a better understanding now that you've kind of had this all front-loaded for you. In this part of the review, we're going to be taking a look at the GPD Win Max 2 running AMD's latest 8840U. Now, I'm going to be comparing it to the GPD Win Max 2 7840U so that we can get a clear understanding of what's going on. If you just look at these particular benchmarks, you're going to be losing out on a lot of nuance that is happening in this video. There's a lot to understand. All of the benchmarks that you're going to be seeing here are comparing the GPD Win Max 2 7840U and 8840U, both running at 7500 MT RAM. However, both of those are also running with the exact same settings, and that I touched base on earlier. You can take a look at my chapter link below in my methodology. That tells you the exact settings, same settings that I'm using. It's looking like we can actually better use that RAM in the 8840U as opposed to the 7840U. With that out of the way, I want to quickly draw your attention to the benchmarks that you see on the screen. Now, one of the things that I had done for the GPD Mini was to quickly show that all of my benchmark data was pretty much mimicking everything that I have already shown on other GPD products. I said that it's behaving just like other GPD products do. And for all intents and purposes, it is the case. So any of my previous benchmarks, you could have just looked at those and got a good idea of what they were performing like. Having said that, I'm showing you this just so you can see that all three of these systems, the GPD Win Mini, the GPD Win 4, and the GPD Win Max 2, are all performing the same in this same TDP slice. Likewise, they perform the same for everything else as well. However, for these benchmarks I'm going to be showing to kind of reduce it so it's not so noisy and it's easier to see, I'm going to reduce it so that we're only looking at the AMD 7840U running on the GPD Max 2 running at 7500 MT RAM versus the AMD 8840U running at 7500 MT RAM. And both of those we're going to take a look at and get a better understanding of how they compare at different TDP slices. So if we take a look here, you can see that at 10 watt, effectively all of these are the same. They're marginally different. All of them are more or less in line. The only differences that we're going to see here is that the GPD Max 2, which says 7500 MT RAM, that's my updated score, which has the latest AMD drivers. Likewise, with the GPD Win Mini, it had later drivers, and the Win 4 had older drivers. But that's the only difference between those particular benchmarks that you see, and you're not seeing that big of a deal. So let's go ahead and reduce this. We're going to do, going forward, we're just going to be looking at the GPD Win Max 2 7840U versus the 8840U. All right, so here we are taking a look at the 10 watt TDP slice between the AMD's 8840U versus their 7840U. And what's interesting here is that we're seeing that we're looking at around a 11% performance difference on averages and around a 6% performance difference on 1 percentile. This is very important data. And something that I showed you just prior is that when we take a look and we compare these two machines going side by side, it's in actuality that the AMD 7840U is using less total power, both of them being exactly equal. And that basically averages out to a 7% power difference. So if we take a look at the 1 percentile, we can see that we're relatively doing the same thing. We're just spending more power and getting better performance in the 8840U and the 7840U. That is within this particular TDP slice. Next up, we're going to be looking at the 15 watt TDP slice. And once again, our averages are around 11% better and our 1 percentile is around 9% better, going on to 20 watt. And here at 20 watt, we still have the performance advantage. The 8840U is performing around 5% better on averages and around 8% better on 1 percentile. And this is where things get kind of interesting, because when we take a look at how power is affected at the 20 watt level, we start to see a difference. And here we are looking at the 25 watt TDP slice. And once again, we're still 6% better on averages and around 9% better on 1 percentile. So everywhere we're looking here, we're still getting better on the 8840U. The next game we're going to be looking at for benchmarks is Deus Ex Mankind Divided. This is running at 720p. There is no upscaling on these games. I also was using the DirectX 11 backend. This is important because there is a DirectX 12 version, but it is one of the last DirectX 11 hard games that exists, and it's a very punishing game, especially at ultra presets. It looks beautiful. It runs its own engine, which makes it great and more well-rounded to put in benchmarks, because you can get Unreal Engine 3, Unreal Engine 4, and that covers a bunch of games that are there. But when you can start taking a look at other games, I always love including it. That's what we're taking a look at here. So let's take a look at our 10 watt TDP slice, and our averages look like the 8840U is doing about 28% better, and our 1 percentile is 40% better. So this is a gigantic difference between the two. This could be just because of that 1 watt difference that we already know about. If we were just to give the 7840U 1 extra watt, that could be this giant difference that we're seeing here, or at least close to it, within the realm of being somewhat more in the realm of what's going on. Anticipating that you're going to get 40% better 1 percentile from the same wattage, when we know that it's technically using more wattage, isn't going to be the case here. So just always keep that in mind. Let's go to the 15 watt TDP slice. All right, so here we are taking a look at the 15 watt TDP slice, and things are starting to look a little bit more sane here. If we take a look at our averages, the 8840U is only around 13% better, and our 1 percentile is 20% better. Not that gigantic difference that we saw before, because again, as we're boosting up TDP, the difference in power is going to be negligible, really. So the only differences that we're going to see is the differences of the 8840U starting to be able to use that better RAM, that faster RAM, in a bigger difference. And we're going to start seeing that bandwidth improvement coming to the 780M GPU. Let's go to the 20 watt TDP slice. And next up, our 20 watt TDP slice. If we take a look at our averages, we're looking at a 6% difference on our averages and a 7% difference on our 1 percentile. But this is still within the realm of what the 8840U is doing, especially as we go up to the higher wattages, like I've already said and indicated. So let's go ahead and take a look at the 25 watt TDP slice. All right, now when we're at 25 watt, this is really the ceiling of where power is going to be going on the 7840U or even the 8840U. This is where we're really going to be tapping out on how much bandwidth we have memory-wise. So pushing any more power into this is going to be near useless, and there's going to be massive diminishing returns. If we take a look at our averages, we're looking at around a 4% better score on averages and around 5% better on 1 percentile. Still, the 8840U is a clear winner here, especially when we take a look at it from total system power. Up next, we're going to be taking a look at Horizon Zero Dawn. This is running at 720p with the Favor Performance Profile. Again, this is using its own particular engine, and I like including it because something outside of Unreal Engine 3 or 4 or any other, like Unity, some other big game engine that is run on a bazillion types of games, where we have static engines that can kind of show better performance across the board. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the 10 watt TDP slice, knowing that effectively the 7840U is using less power here. If we take a look at the averages, we're looking at a 29% performance improvement on our averages and a 16% performance improvement on our 1 percentile. You may be asking, well, why don't I just bump up 7840U to 11 watt? As I indicated before, there's a lot of nuance to this, and we need to be looking at this through a total system power lens. I've included the videos prior at the two extremes, so you have a better understanding of how power is distributed and how it works. Unfortunately, TDP can be whimmed to be anything. You can average it out to whatever you want, especially how AMD plays fast and loose with this. This happened initially on the Steam Deck, likewise, and so on. I've already explained this before, but let's get on to the 15 watt TDP slice. All right, taking a look at our 15 watt, this is where things are going to start to even out a little bit more. But if we take a look at our averages, we're actually going up to 22% better on our averages and around 18% better on our 1 percentile. Again, 8840U does use 7500 millitransfer RAMs better. Like, this is from my earlier test when you can see it at every watt on a CPU bound and a GPU bound on the synthetic benchmarks that I was running. And the difference between 6400 MT being better at the lower end and worse at the upper end, and so clean of a line difference at the upper end for 7500 megatransfers on the 8840U clearly indicate that the 8840U is using this RAM better. Moving along to the 20 watt TDP slice, when we take a look at our averages, we are actually getting a pretty nice boost, around a 10% performance boost. And our 1 percentile, we're doing around an 8% performance boost. So really we're seeing that, again, from the way I'm looking at this, it is of my opinion that the 8840U is looking to use 7500 megatransfer RAM in a much better way. Moving right along up to the 25 watt TDP slice, and we see that we're still looking at a 9% performance improvement on averages and a 7% improvement on 1 percentile. We also show that the 0.2 percentile is down again a little bit. That's an interesting thing, and I wonder what was going on with my 8840U, but that's the second time between 20 watt and 25 watt that we had a little bit of a lower score on 0.2 percentile. Interesting nonetheless. Let's move along to the next game. Okay, up next is Returnal. This game I love to include in benchmarks. It is such a GPU-bound test. It absolutely brutalizes GPUs and highlights the deficiency on a lot of handhelds because we are terribly deficient on GPU performance. We have CPU galore, but we are so far behind on GPU that we are starving for it. And this is such a good test because we're getting such bad frame rate at 10 watt. So it's a great game to highlight because we really need to have far more performance in the GPU segment at lower TDPs to be able to tackle stuff that is exceedingly GPU bound. So up first, we're going to take a look at these averages. We're looking at 26% better averages and 43% better on 1 percentile. Not that that makes a giant difference between 8.7 frames and 12.5 frames, but we're still getting a better result. Again, remember the power difference there. So let's go ahead and move to the 15 watt. Moving right along into 15 watt, we can see that we have a 12% performance improvement on averages and a 34% improvement on 1 percentile. Moving right along into our 20 watt TDP slice, our averages are looking around 7% better on the 8840U and around 9% better on our 1 percentile. Let's go and take a look at 25 watt. Okay, for our last benchmark look at 25 watt on Returnal, we're looking at around an 8% performance improvement on the 8840U, and again, around a 9% performance improvement on our 1 percentile. It's a pretty clean look. Again, remember early on in this video where I showed you the demonstration and visualizing the two differences between how 10 watt TDP works across those two systems on a total system power way and 25 watt in a total system power way. So that has to nuance all of what you're seeing in these particular benchmarks. So always make sure that you understand that. And also keep that in mind when we're starting to look at other handhelds as well. I'm looking into that so that I can properly review these across the board so that we have an actual thumb mark of where performance stands on these particular devices. All right, so now that we're done with game benchmarks, the other part that I wanted to mention is the eGPU, or using Oculink on the GPD Win Max 2. Obviously, this was already available on the 7840U, and it remains to be available on the 8840U. But the thing that I want you to kind of make a note of is that on the back of the 8840U is an Oculink connector. And this Oculink connector on the back of the GPD Win Max 2 is not the best implementation. What I mean by that is that if you wanted to get full PCIe 4, if you push CPU clocks to a higher frequency, you're going to crash the system. So you're going to have to cap the CPU to about 3.3 gigahertz or just put TDP to about 25 watts so that the CPU can't actually spike up all that much. And then you're going to have a much more stable system. If you wanted to push the CPU to the max, what you're going to really need is use the M2 adapter. If you use the M2 adapter on the GPD Win Max 2, at that point, you can go to as high frequency as you like, and it's super stable. So that's the only caveat here that I want to mention. This is not the same as it is for the GPD Win 4 or the GPD Win Mini. It's only really present on the GPD Win Max 2. So be aware of that when we take a look at our eGPU test. But with the GPD G1, this is using AMD 7600 MXT and go up to 120 watts. So I'm going to start off showing you Returnal that can go up to 120 watts because it's such a GPU demanding game. And then we're going to do Cyberpunk at like a lower resolution with ray tracing. And you'll see that it'll automatically dial down to around 40 or 50 watts of power on the GPU. Alrighty, so here I am. I'm using GPD's G1. This is their external GPU that can also be used as a dock. So you can see that I have Oculink going into the back of the 8840U GPD Win Max 2, as well as the Thunderbolt port, but that's actually just charging this device right now, and I got my camera that is helpfully masking that out automatically. So if we take a look on your top left, you'll see our current presented frame rate, so we're actually drawing 110 frames a second looking down right now, which is not very helpful. But if you take a look at total graphics power, we're at 104 watts. You can see CPU package power is at 8 watts. That 8 watts is what is the CPU is running at. And the total system power is at 28 watt. That's power going into the system charging the battery right now. So this is the battery test that I just did, one of the videos for doing the 25 watt test. I finished that up, and now I'm doing this particular video so I can show you guys what it's like to play with an external GPU on the GPD Win Max 2. This is using GPD's G1, which is itself using AMD's 7600M XT. We're going to go and bump the settings up a bit because we're pretty much doing more than we need to right now. So let's go in here, we'll go in settings, and we'll go to video. Well, no, we'll go to graphics, and let's do epic and see what happens. See how bad it makes our day. Alright. So we're 1080p max settings right now. And what you can't really see, I don't know if you can hear it, but it's going to be hard to talk while I'm battling this. I don't know if you can hear it, but the rumble on the GPD Win Max 2 is excellent. So right now I am using the analog sticks. I'm playing on the GPD Win Max 2 right now. My frame rate took a dip. Let me get those sweet, sweet juice. Modified sidearm? No, thank you. That's not what I want. Just battling that dude took a lot out of me. I should probably not do epic settings. But I didn't know I was going to have a gnarly battle right there. So this is 1366 by 768 with ray tracing low and FSR enabled, and we're getting a pretty healthy 60 FPS. Let me just make sure that I'm not like using VSync of some kind here, because that number is awfully... Okay, no, VSync is off. Okay, interesting.
Listen, Mano, I got this thing. Mind if I borrow your wheels? I got a date with Misty, but I can't take the metro.
So what's interesting here is right now I don't have it enabled, but there is AMD Smart Shift, which will kind of combine the power of the GPD G1 with the 8840U. So as far as AMD is concerned, the DGPU that we're using over Oculink is technically like on the same system itself, so it will share the same TDP. The only thing you have to do is go into the BIOS and enable Smart Shift, and that'll do it for you. And then you can just go ahead and push TDP as high as you like. Alright, so I think that's a good look at using the GPD G1, the GPD's external GPU, which also acts as a dock for the GPD Win Max 2, the 8840U version. Obviously, you can use other Oculink GPUs, which is what I do, but if you wanted something that was an easy turnkey solution, the GPD G1 is a solution that you can use. All right, here I am once again reviewing the controls on the GPD Win Max 2. Largely, there's only a few things that I want to talk about here, and I'm going to reiterate and repeat myself quite a lot. These Hall-based analog sticks are absolutely fantastic when you consider the depth of the sticks. They're not going to be the best analog sticks in the world, but for where they are and the placement and the functionality, they are really amazing. When we take a look, when I just push a little bit, right? The amount of finesse that I have like in pushing in anything. There is no cardinal magnetism. They go exactly where I want. Now, this is a very short throw analog stick. Like, there's not a bunch of room here, but it's really good. Now, for a lot of people, when you see this average error, that's an average error for circularity. I don't care that this makes a perfect circle. Number one, it doesn't need to make a perfect circle. And in fact, going over that is how it should be. The Steam Deck does it. Xbox controllers do it. Every good controller does this. So making a perfect circle is not a quality indicator of how good the analog sticks are. I understand that there are some people that don't like these analog sticks, so your mileage may vary with regard to what type of analog stick you like. Maybe these are too small for you, but the type of fidelity that you get out of it and just being able to push and the nuance that you get out of pressing in these analog sticks in any given direction, they are great for their size. They are actually fantastic for their size. And next up, obviously, we have the Vita-like D-pad. This is something, if you've been following my channel for a while, you know that I am an absolute fan of it. When I first actually used the Vita D-pad, I fell in love with it, and it's why I asked GPD to be inspired by it. The first time that this showed up on any device on GPD was the GPD Win Max 1, and they've been keeping it going ever since, and I'm so glad that they do, because their implementation of it is really fantastic. How they've done it on the GPD Win Max is no way to bottom out on the D-pad itself. You can see that when I'm pressing down in the center, I'm actually just accidentally pressing on the side, so there's no way to bottom out from the center of the D-pad. Also, just rolling around is sensationally easy, and also, look, listen. Not only is there an auditory feedback of which type of direction you're pressing in. Not that that's necessary, but even when you're pressing it so you can hear it, when you press in a given direction, there is a noticeable click that is depressed underneath your thumb that instantly tells you with the feedback that you've pressed in that direction, which is why I've become such a big fan of dome-based D-pads in general. And the implementation by GPD is really fantastic. Also, their Vita-like deep face buttons. I mean, there's not really much to talk about face buttons. If they work, and they work just fine. On the back, we have our analog triggers, and they work just fine as well, especially for the types of controls they are and how you're going to be holding it. I love this implementation, this sideways implementation, much like how the Steam Deck is with sideways controls. It just feels comfortable. You also have this very large full-size keyboard where you're not going to get it on anything else. I wouldn't say that thumb typing on this is something that you should do unless you have super large hands. I have thumb typed on this from time to time whenever I didn't really feel like putting it down on my lap. However, just using it as a laptop itself is what makes this device so absolutely versatile, with being able to do both of them and straddle that line so well. Not to mention that I have been using the 7840U version as my main desktop, and I've been going out through Oculink. Overall, there's nothing like it on the market, and GPD did a fantastic job with its implementation. There's really nothing more that I could have asked from GPD here. They made the form factor that I absolutely love, and they killed it everywhere. And so you can see the types of standby that I have here. We have modern standby, which obviously isn't everyone's favorite. We have hibernate and fast startup. Fast startup, I really don't recommend. I didn't disable it yet, but I just recommend just disabling it from the get-go. S3 is not available anymore. So basically we have standby, modern standby, and hibernate as our two standby options. So that's my review on GPD's latest iteration of the GPD Win Max 2. This is using AMD's 8840U, so this would, I guess, be the GPD Win Max 2 2024 edition. If you did not yet own a GPD Win Max and you were thinking about owning one, I really recommend it. For what it's worth, what you're seeing right now is actually running on my GPD Win Max 2 hooked up to a GTX 4090 via Oculink, and that's what I'm recording on right now. So it has been my desktop replacement for 8 months now. It's been for a long time that I've been running this, and I've been super happy with that particular setup. So if you wanted to have something where you can take your desktop with you whenever you want it, and it's a portable gaming laptop, it's the best of both worlds. So I am absolutely a big fan of it. It's not for everyone. I wouldn't say it's for everyone, but when we take a look at the build quality and how everything else reviews, I love the GPD Win Max 2, and I'm glad that GPD has made this particular form factor. And I'm also glad that GPD went all out. Everything that you could have possibly asked for to be in the GPD Win Max 2 is in it, and they did a fantastic job. I look forward to GPD further upgrading the GPD Win Max 2 with some other enhancements. But that's it for right now. I hope this was informative, and I hope you have a better idea of how TDP is scaling on AMD's side. Anyway, that's it for me, guys. As always, thank you for your time, and thanks for watching.